Greetings, mammals, and welcome back to the 10,000 Heroes Show. I'm your host, Ankur Shah Delight, and this show is about being the species we want to see in the world. Or, to put it another way, it's about cleansing the word purpose of any dogmatic or otherwise unhelpful associations. We explore what you, me, and 9,998 of our friends can do to make progress on personal enlightenment, world peace, and everything in between. So 2 years ago, I overheard a conversation at a local farmer's market about clam gardens. And just like you, I was like, clam gardens? What the hell is that? Being a nosy podcast host, I eavesdropped, eventually inserted myself, and got some contact information. A couple months ago, I finally found that business card and followed up. And today, I caught up with Hal'qumi'num Nicole Norris of the Halalt First Nation on what's now known as Vancouver Island in the Canadian province of British Columbia, which just happens to be a stone's throw away from where I lived, if I could throw a stone 18 miles across a waterway. So Nicole is a Shellfish Aquaculture Specialist, an Intergovernmental Communicator, cultural support worker, knowledge holder, and language preserver for the Hul'qumi'num people. And she wears a ton of hats, works a lot in disaster prevention with local communities in British Columbia. And she's also incredibly fun to talk to and not afraid to get deep and trippy from the very beginning, as you will soon hear. So I had several shifts in understanding during our interview, especially around how we as humans relate to the other species around us, as well as how we relate to our ancestors and our descendants. And I learned about what these clam gardens are and how just incredibly awesome they are. So if you're interested in that, keep listening. Let's jump in. Really, Nicole, what I'm interested in talking about are things that we don't normally get an opportunity to talk about. And I always think about, I love parties. I love cocktail parties. And I always think about the party of the future where we can start with a question that's way more interesting than where are you from or what's your work or what's your status or something like that. But to really get to like, all right, what's providing us meaning? What's providing us purpose? And so that's why the first question in this kind of interview is like, what is your current understanding of your purpose and what's motivated you to do all these crazy and different and interlaced things that you've told me that you've done?
I have a really simple answer to that. I'm just a celestial being here as a guide, and my entire soul's purpose is to learn and to teach. And as I embrace that concept of, I was not brought here to be a lawyer, to be a business maker, to learn the art of business making. I was here to learn the vibration of soul and to teach the vibration of mind. And whatever the surrounding environment is, whether it's massage and meditation, whether it's quiet time on a beach or soothing souls during an emergency event, or sitting quietly and absorbing somebody's story through residential school, my soul and theirs is constantly going through this cycle of learning and teaching and having these aha moments that I think that connect you to a frequency that is hindered by buildings and electricity and industrialism, colonization. I talk about colonization on the constant, and I always say, I'm addicted to hydro. I love the lights. I love the internet. I love being able to research and constantly learn and then translate that depending on who I'm sitting in front of. So that's the basic answer I've got for that one.
Yeah. So I have some metaphysical questions.
Sure.
I guess it's more of an origin story question as well. Like, how did you come to this understanding? Is this something you developed through your own experiences, or is this like kind of part of your cultural inheritance?
I've always been this way. I've always had a higher sense of knowing. I've always been able to forecast. I've always had that ability to connect differently. I was born in a tiny town to a woman that wasn't supposed to have children.
In what way? Like not allowed
physically.
to? Oh, okay.
She she had openings where there was closures and closures where there should have been openings. And by chance, she got pregnant. And she didn't know, actually, until she was probably about 4 or 5 months along. And so my arrival, I wasn't even fully developed when I showed up, a little bit eager to get on with the journey, I guess. But I have memories of when I was a baby and being at the beach. And I think that could be why I have this like lifelong fascination with the ocean and what's under just under the surface of a beach and how simplistic and complex it is. So I've just always been hyper intuitive since I was very, very young. People are naturally drawn to me, animals, seniors, people. It's insane. I'll go to the grocery store. People will reach out to touch me. Strangers. It's happened my entire life. So I just accept it. I embrace it. And I just come to the terms that obviously I vibrate differently. And surprisingly enough, I have a brother, and he's 5 years younger than me. He too shouldn't be here. It's like there's no physical explanation for the both of our existence. And he too is quite a bit like me, very knowledgeable, well beyond his years, and in different ways than I am. So I honor that breath in my body differently. I think I honor the heartbeat. You often hear people, they'll say, "Oh, you should have." When you're having a stressful moment, stop and have 5 moments of recognition and gratitude. I have that every day that I wake up. And I think that one of the things that we need to learn to do as an open society before everything else is just to honor that heartbeat in the morning. And when we give thanks, that's what we should be giving thanks to. It's been beating since our conception. And the things that it has worked to get through school and life and all the mishaps that teach us big lessons about things we should be focusing on really for our development, that if you just take a pause and a moment just to honor that simple heartbeat and how it works to keep your essence going, your body.
I'm sitting with the impossibility of your mother's pregnancy and therefore your birth and your brother's birth. How did that impact her parenting?
My entire life up until her passing was surrounded by contentment. I was never too cold. I was never too warm. I was never hungry. I don't know the essence of hungriness because there was always something to snack on. There was always a sweater. There was always a fan. When I was really young, she used to bring me to the grocery store at the peak times of the summer so that I could be in the air conditioning. As the years wore on, she became quite this spiritual enabler to not be so stuck on society labels and boxes and what open society says we should become as women. Open society says you should go to school, you should get an education, get a good job, find a gentleman, settle down, get married, have some children. She taught me some phenomenal things, about perception and perspective. And in turn, my dad, he too taught different things in a different way. But, becoming and being when really there was no physical explanation for it. My dad used to say, "You changed my entire life when you showed up." The sun rose and set on my face for him because I wasn't supposed to be. They were content with knowing that they weren't going to have children. And then I came and life got, recession hit and life became different. They were business owners. and then they became non-business owners and went back to school. So the majority of my childhood, they were studying constantly. And so that thirst for knowledge, I think, is probably where that comes from. Children are products of their environments. Whatever way you are in front of children will be how they mimic, right? So my dad used to say, honey, your education is free as long as you've got a library card. And how true that concept is. He also said the greatest skill set you can nurture within yourself is networking. You'd be amazed what you'll learn from people just based on their life experience. And these are things that they taught me at a very, very young age. Long before my brother showed up, I was always surrounded by adults and, enabled in expression and art.
Wow. Do you have a sense of preference as to how you express this calling? Does it matter to you if you work in business or disaster relief or sea gardens or environmental stewardship, or is it's just expressing itself no matter what you do?
All of it is teaching. And ironically, in exactly those same spaces, I'm still teaching the same thing. It's just that the audience changes or the person in front of me changes. Whether it's teaching them to stop and be present and to listen differently. We have a word in my language called Hul'qumi'num, and it means to listen. But the way in which you listen is not just with your ears. You're listening with your eyes, because what you see creates commentary. It's creating that understanding. Then you're hearing the sound, but you're also feeling that vibration. And that creates the picture. And so when I teach people to listen, I'm teaching them to listen to the sound of the water as the tide is coming in. How many bubbles do you hear being popped as the water is coming over the beach? I'm teaching people to listen between the words when somebody is translating a traumatic event, such as displacement or their home being burnt down. How to actively listen. In business, it's the same thing. You're listening for the need in order to create the product. In massage, you're listening to the body as to what relief it needs, whether it's muscular, whether it's just to be held, or whether it's energetic. So I think that is the biggest thing that is the common denominator out of all of the different hats that I wear. And then the next thing would be about learning about how that person or those people communicate. The greatest foundation of communication is you must seek to understand in order to be understood. So if I'm sitting in front of somebody and they're a scientist, I listen to how they speak, how they calculate knowledge, how they translate that. And then I use that knowledge or those words, the knowledge and their understanding, and I add it to the things that I'm going to teach them.
So they can hear you.
So they can really hear me. Simple, really.
Yeah, I mean, simple. Yeah, that was nice. That was nice. Yeah. Because it's just so clear that listening is such a challenge for most of us most of the time. And the kind of, see if I understood correctly, it's not just listening with the ears. It's not just listening to the words. There's a deeper listening that you're indicating or pointing to. listening, feeling the vibration, understanding. So that's a physical thing, feeling the vibration. But there's also this cognitive element of trying to understand what those words actually mean to that person. And then there's this physical reflective element with the, and see if I got this right, with the eyes. They like, you're listening, you're processing with the body, the mind, the ears, and the eyes are revealing what you've understood. And so having an impact on the person you're talking to. Is that what?
Not really. So when you're looking at somebody, it's active observance. So you're watching how somebody, the pattern of their breath as they're communicating, the way they hold their hands, the way they may touch their body, or how they hold their face, or maybe they have a stance, a certain kind of stance. It tells you a lot about the information that's coming forward, whether that person is confident, whether they're a master at what they're talking about, or whether they've just learnt this and they're still practicing the commentary for complete saturation of knowledge.
And what's the impediment? What's the block for most of us that you see that's between us and that level of listening?
The first thing is ego. The second thing is esteem.
Esteem.
People
for the other.
Yeah. So people have a lot of people have a self-esteem issue. And I'm not sure if it comes down to projected biases. So if I'm sitting in front of a person that is a shellfish biologist, I don't assume that they absolutely know everything. But somebody that maybe doesn't think the same way that I do would have a self-esteem issue around what they think that they know is of value, or what they have to contribute that would be of worth. And then you get the polar opposite, where that person is ego-driven and they don't spend the time actively listening and contributing. They're either trying to contribute.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they're trying to control the dial. We're like, I already know the answer.
Yeah.
But both of these are the same. I mean, in my mind, they're the same thing, in that whether it's a low self-esteem or a overly high self-esteem, either way, you're focused on yourself. And so it doesn't leave as much space for the listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no room.
No. And I think the biggest hindrance of that is time. So I work in government, and we have these strict time constraints on meetings. So it really pulls away from that people-centered collective gathering of information to create solutions.
Yeah.
It's an extractive kind of process at times.
Yeah.
And so we have this grand shift in government now about how it needs to be people-centered. You know, we have to make room for each other and get to know each other differently. On my team, we had a show and tell, and there's a lady on my team. She comes from Iran. And wow, I had no idea. It was so lush and beautiful there. And she had all these pictures, and she did this slide deck of her family and getting to know her on a personal level, and, you know, what her special talents are, and the passion that projects her teaching or enables her teaching up from her soul, those things that sets a soul on fire. Really fascinating to be able to have that space and time to do that.
Yeah, it reminds me, I took this independent study course with an awesome professor of mine in college on the history and philosophy of anarchism. And I ran into the work of a guy named Peter Kropotkin. I don't know if you've ever read this guy. I think he was a count. He was some kind of aristocrat, but he got into biology and he went to Siberia and studied all of the interactions with the birds and the different animals there. And he was a contemporary of Darwin. So at the same time as Darwin was doing his work and understanding how species would compete under conditions of scarcity, Kropotkin wrote this almost this like parallel book talking about how all these different species would collaborate in conditions of abundance. And so this whole like survival of the fittest idea, which is definitely like, we experience that all the time, all around us, but it's actually quite context dependent, is what Kropotkin would say. And so I'm going back to your meeting now. If you have like a 3-hour meeting, then there's time for everybody to like settle in, check in, share what's on their heart, reveal some stuff, share their ideas, go back and forth. If you have a 30-minute meeting, then it's like, I need to get my point across, then I got to go to the next thing. And it really creates this different way of interacting.
Yes. So I operate very much differently inside government walls. I'm still the same person I am on the beach as I am at a podium, as I am in Teams meetings. I actively reach into people on a continuous basis to develop those relationships. Because in government, you've got these classifications. You're a this or you're that, and you fall into this org chart. Through relationship making, you recognize that every single person on the org chart has got a mastery of some sort, has a passion, has knowledge that comes from a different discipline than my own, and that what they do here in government, that's just something that they do. You know, it's like washing dishes or sweeping the floor. That's just something that they do. That's not who they are. And when you're trying to create solutions for the citizens of the province, you need each other and you need each other's ideas and where you find the passions. I'm kind of like a little hummingbird with a golden thread in my beak. And I go from person to person, creating all of these little interconnectedness to create or to uplift or to nourish different things. We have a gentleman, he's an emergency management technician. So he does all sorts of things and stuff in a provincial, regional emergency operations center. We call them pre-ops. And that guy, he's a chef. And he's worked in really prestigious restaurants. And when I discovered that about him, I asked him, what are your thoughts on food security? And he went into this like long-winded ShamWow of a commentary. He definitely has a whole different kind of relationship with food than I do. But matching what he was saying with what I know about business and what I know about distribution.
Yeah.
And I said to him, what are you doing in that seat? Why? Like, holy cow, you're absolutely brilliant. And nobody knows.
Yeah.
And then I become the town crier. Did you know that this man knows this much about this and he comes from this industry?
Yeah.
And so I think it really helps all of our lateral colleagues see each other for the strengths, for the passions, the mastery of who we are as people, that versus our job title.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. Okay. I'm going to play my little role here as the steward to push us in a slightly different direction because I have a goal. My goal, which I realized my goal a few minutes ago, which is to talk to you about interspecies communication. But we're not going to do that right now because there's a step on the path we need to get to, which is this whole Clam Garden, sea garden thing that brought us together. And so I'd love for you to just explain a little bit. Imagine that the people listening to this show have no idea what those words mean. And we'll talk about that for a little bit. And then I'll get to my cliffhanger question about interspecies communication.
So there's 3 different parts to what people know as the Clam Gardens. I call them sea gardens because of what they end up creating. We'll get to that. So the first part of it is I'm a descendant of Stutson. He is one of the first 4 that fell from the sky that created all of the Salish people. Stutson, the stories that I tell of him now, I'm sure are not the ones that people previous to me. He's tall, he is handsome, and he was a great hunter and a great fisher, and he had a, very astute and artistic family, those kinds of things. But there's stories of him being on the beach in those spaces. The other part of that story is those structures, according to Western science, are 4,000 years old, at least.
Wait, which structures are we talking about?
These rock walls, these clam gardens.
Okay, because I didn't even know that it was a clam garden was related to a rock wall. So I think you might need to.
So the rock
really
wall
is
is like the clam garden.
It's a rock wall.
It's a rock wall. That's what it is. So
I just want to paint the picture really clearly, because some people, they might be living in like Nebraska and not have any idea what it looks like out here. So there's the Pacific Northwest. There's these like enormous conifers, these beautiful cedars and Douglas firs. Goes right down to the beach. There's the wild Pacific Ocean. The beach is usually like, there might be some sand, but there's also like big rocks of all different kinds. There's seaweed pegged to the rocks, and gooseneck barnacles and barnacles. And then in a little cove, some people have 3,500 years ago or more started building these rock walls that create more of an intertidal zone.
Yes. So it changes over time. So say the beach is like this, and over time the waves come and they bring things over the wall, and it creates greater growing grounds for bivalves.
Okay. I'm gonna translate those hand gestures. So, and I actually studied watershed management and terracing. And so this is like sea terracing. So what Nicole just did, she put her hand at a slope. So the beach isn't going down at this slope, maybe a 30-degree downward slope. She's like, okay, you build a wall at the downward point of that slope, and what happens is when the sea goes over the wall, I don't know how this wall is not getting destroyed by the tides, but you'll tell me about that later.
I will.
It gets full of nutrients and silt and sand and decomposing whatever, and then it gradually kind of fills up and becomes a flat terrace instead of a slope in there. And all that, I'm guessing, nutrition creates more biodiversity and productivity.
Yeah. So the other side of that is there was a gentleman that came from a university, and he was doing an aerial survey. He was flying along the coast of Vancouver Island, and it was one of the lowest low tides. And as he's looking out of his window down at the beach and he's taking pictures, he sees these rock wall structures. And of course, he's amazed. Like, I can imagine, like how surprised he was to see this. So he turns his little Cessna around.
So you think he immediately knew this was built a long time ago?
No. Because after turning around and taking more pictures, he went back to the university, to his cohort, and for 3 years, they sat around and hypothesized about what in the world these things could be.
Oh, aliens, dinosaurs.
Maybe, right? Who knows? So I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for those conversations. So somebody along the way said, hey, you know what? Maybe you should talk to the local natives. Maybe they know something about it. Oh, here's a concept. So they did. Fast forward a couple of years. I was at my band office getting some paperwork done or something to this effect. And I was leaving, walking back out through the parking lot, and you hear this crunch, crunch, crunch behind me. And I hear this little voice that says, excuse me, are you the clam queen? And I turned around and I laughed. I spent a lot of years in the aquaculture industry, and somewhere along the line, because I know so much about so many different species and how to spawn them, how to grow them, where to plant them, what to do with them, how to care for them. They called me the clam queen. And so I turn around and here's this little lady and she says, I have a boardroom full of fishery people that say, you are the person I need to talk to. Do you have 20 minutes to come in? Sure. So I walk into the band office, down the hall to the boardroom, and I come upon this giant table full of old colleagues from my fisheries days. I said, oh, it's like old home week, right? Oh, my goodness, look at you, look at this. And a very treasured loved one of mine points to this whiteboard. There was a whiteboard on the wall, and there was blue circles. And as I looked at it, and I looked at him, and he said, I know that you know what this is. And I said, I definitely know what this is. And I grabbed one of those blue markers and started talking about rocks, rock shape, rock weight. You know the old game Tetris?
Yeah, love that game.
These walls are built like Tetris. So you don't just pile rocks up. It is methodical. It is strategic. It's mindful how you put these walls together because you have to build it to be stable against the wake of the waves.
Which is incredibly powerful and never stops.
Yes. And then not only do you have water users in that space, but they also have to be able to withstand our relatives of the sea. So we have octopus, we have crabs, worms, fish, different species of bivalves. And then we also have to be mindful of our relatives of the woods. So raccoons, deer, bears, dogs, other things, and our relatives of the sky. Birds will come down and, walk along. So how we put these rock walls together was specific to be able to withstand those key environments. So when we marry the concepts of rock walls 4,000 years ago and Stetson, it brings it down to this one single space of me. I learned about these rock walls from a gentleman. His name was Einar Piel. He's passed away. And it turns out he's a distant relative of mine that I just discovered and didn't realize. But he and I we met and instantly hit it off. He's much older than me, and he had so much to tell me in an instant. He taught me about oysters and the octopus in a way different way than I'd ever learned from anybody. And I remember this one night we were out on Cortez Island. It was the middle of the night, and he said, get your thermos. You and we're going to go and do something. I want to teach you something. Meet me at the dock at this time. It was like 10:30 at night. Absolutely. Yeah. Get my gear on, and we go out. We tread along in this little boat, and we get into this cove. It is dark. The moon is so big. It's like, it's like the night sun. We didn't need any lamps because of how big the moon was. The night was so clear. And he said, we're just going to sit here and have our coffee until the tide goes down. And then I'm going to teach you something. I said, okay. So as the tide goes down, he gets up and he's gathering all of these rocks. And he sits down in front of me and he says, watch this. And he starts to strategically put these rocks together. And he makes this like little curved wall. And he said, this one is for fish. And then he takes the rocks down and he made a straight wall. And he said, this one is to change the beach. And then he took a few more rocks off of either end and he made this little like rock cave. And he says, that is for octopus. And it hit me like I was ordained with celestial knowledge. I had this grand light bulb moment. And all of a sudden I could see it, like how geography plays a role in how you create those walls, not only on the beach, but what's above in the intertidal zone. Is there big rocks? Is there driftwood? Is it exposed? Is there a lot of, woodland substance? What does the shape of the actual space look like? Is it a cove? Is it exposed? Is it closer to the open water? Is it near quiet water? Because you have to be mindful about the things that are going to interact with this wall. And he said to me, we could build these on the beach and this will help with, and, because we were doing really big oyster stuff back then. Anyway, so fast forward to me being in this boardroom, in this meeting, and I'm standing here and I'm explaining all of this to the people in the room. And the lady that chased me down in the parking lot, her name is Kathleen Johnny. She said, Nicole, would you be willing to come to a meeting about this with Parks Canada? Absolutely. She explains about this aerial shoreline survey, this professor, the 3 years of this hypothesis think tank moment, and how all of a sudden, here we are. And she said these have been discovered at lowest tide within the National Park Reserve that is monitored and maintained by Parks Canada. Okay. They go through a series of meetings. I can't imagine what it took to get us to be able to go into the park to restore that rock wall.
Oh, wow.
Because Parks Canada, the federal government, drew this incredible invisible circle around the Gulf Islands. It's just a pocket of islands. And to protect something, you should leave it alone, was the concept. And I said, to me, that's obscene. You would not take a child and put that child in a laundry basket and not talk to that child, not feed it, not clothe it, not speak to it. That's not protection. What the heck?
But it's very natural, right? Like I think of, I live near this giant national park, Olympic National Park, and it was created by Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Who came and saw the incredible devastation of the logging of the old growth forests. And the quote was something like, I want to kill the bastards who did this. And I think the conservation movement is just a direct flip response of the extraction movement. And it's very different than like the indigenous way of like, oh, we'll actually like live with something and not totally fuck it up because we're living with it. But it makes sense that, right? Like if you're going to extract something, then you can be like, oh, that was bad. Now I'm not going to touch it.
Yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. Yeah. So then here we are. This is my first night on the beach. And it was a night tide. It was the winter time. And there was a student that came from the University of Saskatchewan. And he was out there. He had this like incredible lamp. He had all these tools, and he wanted to interview me. And this was for his thesis. He's working on a thesis. And so I said to him, I'm more than willing to sit down and talk to you, but we're going to do some things first, culture first. I'm going to teach you something. Oh, Nicole, absolutely. I said, and then I will tell you when you can turn on your light and turn on your cameras. Deal? He's absolutely. Yes, Nicole, everybody says I should be talking to you. So we're walking out again with a bright moon. And I said, just hold on a second. So I pulled off my boots and I pulled off my wool socks and I nestled my bare feet into the substrate as I'm standing immediately in front of this wall. And I stopped and I changed the pattern of my breath. And I brought it down into the essence of my Sali, my spirit, right? So breathing so differently. And I turned and I looked at him and I said, you know what? He says, what? I said, I'm standing in Stetson's footprint. And the minute the words came out of my mouth, I was like, oh man, what a privilege. What an incredible privilege. And I could feel the tears starting to wellow up in my eyes. Oh man. And I reached over while hanging onto his arms. I reached over and I grabbed a rock off the wall. And I put my hand on top of it. And I said to him, I am literally holding my ancestors' hands. The work that we are doing here is a continuation of the work that they started in the whole thought and concept of setting a table for us. And now we need to do the same so that we set the table for our great-greats. One of my greatest passions in life is my great-grandchildren. And he just you could feel him sink into his soul. And I said, okay, turn on your camera, get the lights going because they're going to teach you about these walls. These walls create a metropolitan city under the water. It's a shopping center. It's a grocery store. It's a high rise, a condo. It's a little suburbia village. All of the loved ones in the water participate here. There's food here. There's water flow here. That interconnectedness between one species and the other. It's a multicultural thing that we've created just under the surface of the water. And when that water recedes and that wall is exposed, that is full of algae and kelp and seaweeds of all sorts and little microorganisms that we can't see with the naked eye, our relatives of the woods come to dine. Our relatives of the sky come to dine. It is so much more than a pile of rocks. It's so much more than changing the beach slope to create more growing grounds for bivalves. It is a revival of a portion of our language that has been asleep. If we never saw carrot again, we wouldn't use that word in our vocabulary. We'd get some old timer that would say, oh, back in the day, my mom used to make the most amazing beef stew. We used to have these things called carrots in it. Bringing people back into that space revives that language, revives those practices of how to care for that space, how to reinforce the wall, how to hand till the beach in a respectful way, how to introduce yourself to the space. To meet you. Good day, my sacred ancestors, my sacred ancestral land. We firmly believe that the breath of our ancestors lives among the trees. It's carried with the wind. And that everything that was there before us is still there for us and needs to be there for what's next to come. And so we have this, I call it a cultural obligation. We have an obligation as stewards of land, stewards of space, and one another to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that all of our relatives, including ourselves and two-legged kin, have those resources to dine on. And without that interaction, it becomes dormant. The other thing that it's revived is nation building. So these rock walls in the Gulf Islands are restored by Senchothan-speaking nations, Hul'qumi'num-speaking nations. It's a collective of like 9 different nations or tribes, as they're known in the Americas. And we come together in tandem to, overturn these beaches, restore these rock walls. And then we do capacity sharing. We do knowledge sharing with our relatives just past the border with the Swinomish. The Swinomish, they are the first tribe that has built a modern day sea garden based on what they've learned and participated in restoring our sea gardens up in the north. So the other thing about these rock walls and the sea garden concept is if we rewind time, take away all the buildings, all the ships, and we're standing along the shore, you and I are in incredible clothing made of pounded cedar and woven wool.
Oh man, I'm so stoked right now.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can hear laughter in the background. You hear language, and you're just at one with the vibration of the space. Back in those times, we weren't all friends and relatives. Those spaces were intertribal. And at times, some of the northern tribes would come down and tribal war with us. They would take some of our people. I always tease them up in the north, and I always say, well, when you see the pretty ones arise, you can tell that it was one of us that had those babies. So creating that rock wall was also bringing that food source closer to shore. It was a safety mechanism as well. When I was young, really young, I remember being at the beach with my grandmother, not clam digging, not anything. We were just there. And I can't quite remember the particulars. I spent time with her by myself at different variations of my lifetime. And every time we were at the beach, she would always say, don't go too close to the water. And I think it probably had something to do with the old canoes coming in and snatching our people off the beach. So these rock walls have a life story as well. Some of it was created around endurance tests, perhaps maybe coming of age ceremony for young men. Perhaps maybe that was the space where a canoe was welcomed in from another tribe with a dowry and a bride-to-be, or relatives that came to trade certain things. Maybe they were coming with hides, bear hides, or elk hides, and we were giving them dried clams or barbecued clams for their journey home. So the interconnectedness comes down to one single clam. That clam is connected to the relatives of the woods. That clam is connected to the relatives of the sky, to you and I, to the space, to the wall, to our relatives of the ocean. It becomes that common denominator food source or ingredient. And all of this, people always say, oh, Nicole, you're so knowledgeable, you're so wise. Indigenous knowledge is based on generational observation. When we really respect the fact that we aren't the only ones, when we respect the heartbeat in every other living thing, we understand that we have an obligation to continue to interact with these spaces to feed. I wouldn't want to shoot and eat a skinny deer if I have a whole family to feed. I certainly wouldn't want to fish a really small fish. So we have an obligation to take care of these spaces, to feed them. And when you zoom out a little bit and you look at the food chain, when I was in grade school and learned about the food chain, I was fascinated by this. Wow, one thing eats this, that eats this, that eats this, and then this comes in and they eat this and this and this and this. And you could see this like spider web of the way that all of these different entities of this food web. And we're in the mix as well. You hear all these like stories about grizzly attacks and shark attacks. Well, they got to eat too. Nowadays, we have so much industrialization. We have so much building and development that they are taking away different parts of the food system. Orchards that used to be in different spaces are now cut down, dug out, and there's a motel or a hotel there, a resort. They've overfished in the high seas. So they've removed a certain number of food products from the ocean for our ocean relatives. And now there's a disruption. Now we have bears coming into the village. Now we have whales coming into coves where they don't come. You know what else they have? Our animals are turning white. White peacocks, white black bears, white ravens. Long ago when I was really young, I had an elder from a really remote community say to me, we have a duty and a job to do as Hul'qumi'num, as First Nations people. And our job is to take care of one another with love and respect, right? If we love and respect the bears, we'll go into the woods and maybe we will plant some apple trees or pear trees. If we love and respect the salmon, we will weigh in with language around global legislation for the high seas. If we really honor the job of the birds, our relatives of the sky, we'll ensure that they not only have a place to rest, but they will also have a food source. When you sew the little golden thread between all of them, it comes down to us. We're the center of that web. And if we don't lend a hand in every direction that we can in a good way, what will we have left for the ones that are yet to be here? One of the things that I always say, I love students and science students in particular, are these grand questions around, do you think that clam or that sockeye tasted the same for Stutson as it does for me? I'm unsure. My logic brain says no, but my heart says absolutely. So my grandest desire is to ensure that by the time my great-grandchildren get here and we pass down the stories of Stutson and then I'm woven into the mix, that I want them to be able to stand in my footprints. And I want them to know that I work tirelessly to speak on behalf of the water quality issues, to speak on behalf of the whales and the clams, and put forth the effort to restore these walls and to work cohesively with government so that we have a space to come home to where the songs are alive among the trees. And that when they sit down to have a beach feast, that when they put that clam or they put that piece of sockeye into their mouth, and as their water as their mouth just floods with saliva and the flavor just envelops their whole being, that they are transported to this space where I am, that they are transported to the space of Hul'qumi'num, Mary Rice, my great-great-grandmother, or that maybe they're transported to the space of Chief Capilano. He's my fifth great-grandfather. Or maybe they're transported to the place where Stutson was before all the other interactions with those spaces. Just trying to set a table for my great-grandchildren.
Thank you, Nicole.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job of answering all the questions I didn't ask. And I appreciate that.
Absolutely. What's your thought?
I'm just absorbing. I'm really impacted by the beauty of that obligation. Like, part of my conception of purpose is finding this intersection between how we contribute, how we serve, and what brings us joy. Mm-hmm. And the way you phrase that, maybe the energy with which you said that, it really struck me as true to that notion of that obligation as a joyous contribution, not as like, oh man, we have to do this, but like, no, we get to continue this legacy. We get to construct abundance out of our effort and do so together. And I can almost just like hear the singing of people doing this work together. My own singing, really. And I'm just like, and 10% of my mind is like, can I do this somewhere near you by? Like, it sounds so awesome. I was really good at Tetris as an 8-year-old.
Yeah, it is. It's a supreme privilege to be Coast Salish. It's an absolute profound honor to be a descendant of Stutson. And what a gift to be in those spaces and to be able to share what I know, but also to honor those that taught me.
Yeah. I wonder if you could tell us just one story, if it feels like a good time and appropriate, about this ancestor of yours, Stutson.
I'm always doing something off the side of my desk. And one of the things I'm doing off the side of my desk is I'm following commentary around the last Salish woolly dog pelt. It is housed at the Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I recently was there to talk about sea gardens. And I had said to the guy that brought me there, I really want to see this pelt. I know it's not the one that Stutson had.
Wait, hold on. Salish woolly dog pelt.
Yes.
Tell me
Salish
more.
Woolly dog. So there was these tiny little dogs. They were white dogs, and they had like
tiny dogs aren't a modern thing. I thought we invented tiny dogs.
I know, right? So they had like long, silky hair. I imagine they must have been hypoallergenic. But what they would do is they would cut the hair off and they would weave it into or spin it into mountain goat wool and pounded cedar to create wool woven blanket. And this is like long, long time ago.
Wait, they would pound cedar into fibers so you could spin it?
Spin it into the wool and with the dog hair.
Whoa.
As a child, as a youth, I was told the story of why Hul'qumi'num, which is Mount Prevost, which is just near my reserve, why it was named that. And my uncle Herb, he talked about Stutson having this little woolly dog. Well, Stutson, one of Stutson's wives was a wool weaver. So he had these like woolly dogs. His lady would take care of these dogs and make these immaculate blankets. And Stutson's dog died. And for days, he walked up Mount Prevost. And at the very top, Stutson was so grief-stricken because he lost his dog. that he wanted to bury him on the top of this mountain, close to the creator, the ancestors, where the water wouldn't get him, where nothing. And when you look at the top of that mountain, it looks like a sleeping dog. The other people that have weighed in on and sharing that story talk about how he wailed, cried, pleaded to the ancestors to take care of his loved one. Hul'qumi'num means dog wagging its tail. And that was his dog's name. So when he buried his dog at the top of this mountain, that mountain became Hul'qumi'num. I think about that, the care that he put into his dog, how his dog provided for us, how he spent time at the beach at Winter Cove, how he took the time to teach others that came after him to hunt, to make cedar rope, to dig a canoe, how him and his 4 brothers spread out to help create our people. Fascinated by him and his life story.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing his story. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for connecting it to all of our stories as the humans and all of our other species with whom we share this planet. I feel like you did a really good job of connecting that first question about the spiritual question of why you're here with the listening to the other humans and to the other species and to the praxis, the action of what it means, not in this like navel gazing world of abstraction, but like, all right, here we are in the world, and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thus concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. I'm Ankur Shah Delight. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. And if you like the show, don't be afraid. Send me a fat wad of cash. Just kidding. I mean, you can. But really, if you like the show and it made a difference in your life, send it to someone you know and like in the hope that it'll make a positive impact in their life. Because that's what this is all about.